The moment that shattered the facade of American politics came when Ron DeSantis, in a nationally televised debate, looked Kamala Harris dead in the eye and said, "Your policies are destroying this country, and you're too weak to fix it." The room went silent. The words hung in the air, charged with venom. It was more than just a political jab, it was personal. And the country was watching. It wasn't just about party lines or ideological differences anymore. This was a battle for the very soul of America. The debate was supposed to be about policy, about the future of the nation. But what happened next was nothing short of an all-out ideological war. DeSantis, notorious for his hard-right stance, had crossed the line. His insults weren't just directed at her position, but at her character, her experience, and, more dangerously, her identity. This wasn't just about power anymore. This was about something deeper, about the very fabric of what it means to be American. For DeSantis, the answer was clear: force, division, and dominance. For Kamala Harris, it was dignity, respect, and unity. In that moment, the entire political landscape shifted. It wasn't just a debate. It was the beginning of a larger reckoning. And with each word, the divide grew wider. But the question was, how far would Kamala Harris go to defend the ideals of justice and truth in the face of such attacks? The stage was set. What would follow would leave everyone on the edge of their seats, questioning not just politics, but the direction of the nation itself. What happened next left the entire country in disbelief. This wasn't just another debate, it was a defining moment in America's political saga. The stakes. The very future of the country. For weeks, Americans had been watching the tension build between the two leading figures. Kamala Harris, the first woman of color to hold the office of vice president, stood as a symbol of progress. She represented a vision of America that embraced diversity, unity, and the strength that came from its melting pot identity. She wasn't just defending policies, she was defending a worldview, a belief that America's greatest strength lay in its ability to evolve, to learn, and to lift every voice, no matter how marginalized. On the other side stood Ron DeSantis, a man whose political rise had been fueled by the very forces that seemed to be tearing America apart. His brand was one of divisiveness, a hard-right ideology that aimed to roll back the clock, to turn back the tide of progress that had lifted so many. For DeSantis, politics wasn't just about leadership, it was about power, control, and a vision of America that catered to the few, not the many. His rhetoric was sharp, unapologetic, and, at times, downright dangerous. As the debate approached, it became clear that this wouldn't be about policy wonkery or respectful discourse. No, this was going to be a battle of ideologies, a collision of two competing visions for what America was and could be. Kamala Harris stood as a beacon of dignity, grace, and truth. Her calm under pressure was her weapon, her unwavering belief in the American ideal her shield. Every word she spoke seemed to resonate with the hope that there was still a chance for the country to live up to its highest ideals. She was the person who had broken barriers to get to this point, a woman who had fought tooth and nail for the underdog, who had faced immense adversity and come out stronger. But DeSantis wasn't backing down. With every word, his arrogance showed itself more. He wasn't interested in a respectful debate, he was here to dismantle, to divide, to win at all costs. And as the hours wore on, it became clear that he was willing to go farther than anyone had expected. The personal barbs, the targeted attacks, they weren't just about policy disagreements, they were an assault on everything Kamala represented. But what happened next, shattered everything we thought we knew about political debate. Kamala, ever the picture of composure, stood her ground. She didn't flinch. She didn't lash out. But there was a fire behind her eyes, something deeper, something that said, "I won't let this go unchallenged." DeSantis, for all his bravado, began to falter. His words were sharp, but they lacked the conviction they once had. The more he leaned into his attacks, the more he revealed the cracks in his own armor. He wasn't a champion of ideas, he was a champion of division. And the cracks were starting to show. The room could feel it. The tension in the air was palpable. It was no longer a debate about policies, it was a test of character, of who would truly fight for the values that had always been at the heart of America. And as Kamala Harris stood in front of the nation, the weight of that responsibility seemed to press down on her. She wasn't just fighting for her political career, she was fighting for every immigrant, every person of color, every woman who had ever been told they didn't belong. She had come this far, and now, more than ever, her words would matter. This wasn't just a political clash, it was a moral one. And the world was watching. The question that everyone was asking wasn't just who would win the debate, but what kind of America would emerge from this fight. As DeSantis spewed his divisive rhetoric, Kamala's resolve grew stronger. She was the hero, standing tall in the face of overwhelming odds. And the nation was about to see exactly why her vision for America would triumph. But the battle was only just beginning. Ron DeSantis didn't rise to power through the traditional routes. He wasn't the moderate, the unifying figure, or the man with broad appeal. He carved his path with sharp elbows, hard rhetoric, and a brand of politics that wasn't interested in consensus, it was interested in power, in control, and in a vision of America that would leave many behind. Born in Florida, DeSantis's political rise wasn't meteoric, but it was strategic. He entered the political arena as a young Navy veteran, a man with the polished, all-American background that seemed to tick every box for conservative voters. He served as a member of Congress, quickly gaining attention for his combative style and fiery speeches, where he never shied away from taking on the establishment. His time in Washington wasn't marked by consensus or collaboration, it was a relentless pursuit of a far-right agenda that alienated anyone who wasn't already on his side. But DeSantis's real political fortunes were made when he ran for governor of Florida in 2018. This was where his ideological extremism found fertile ground, where he could double down on the culture wars, weaponizing everything from immigration to the pandemic in a manner that felt dangerously divisive. His opponent, Andrew Gillum, was the progressive, African-American mayor of Tallahassee, whose candidacy represented the growing movement of change in the state. DeSantis didn't take the high road. Instead, he leaned into the fear-mongering, painting Gillum as a radical socialist, a dangerous threat to the state's values. The now infamous, "Monkey This Up" ad, which implied that a vote for Gillum was a vote for chaos, became one of the defining moments of the race. It wasn't just an ad, it was a message. It was a signal that DeSantis wasn't just running to lead Florida, he was running to dominate, to separate, to push a narrative that centered on fear of the other, the unknown. And it worked. His divisive tactics helped him narrowly win the governorship, and with that, DeSantis solidified his role as the poster child for the far-right political movement in America. In Florida, DeSantis governed as a hardline conservative, rejecting the very idea of bipartisan collaboration. His tenure was marked by battles against public health measures, from his resistance to mask mandates to his refusal to shut down the state during the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic. While other governors in the country were embracing science and listening to health experts, DeSantis took a different route, positioning himself as the antithesis of lockdowns and mandates, wrapping his political identity in the freedom argument. He made national headlines, but not for the reasons he may have hoped. The pandemic, which hit the state harder than most, exposed the cracks in his strategy, his inability to balance his ideology with the reality of public health. And yet, he doubled down. DeSantis's strategy was to keep pushing forward, ignoring the mounting death tolls and hospitalizations, all while his national profile grew. It was clear that his priorities lay elsewhere, solidifying his place in the far-right wing of the Republican Party, playing to the base that adored him for his staunch stances. But in doing so, he made enemies, not just on the left, but within the very state he governed. Floridians were left divided, some singing his praises for his defiance, others critical of his recklessness. But it wasn't just the pandemic that defined DeSantis's contradictions. His approach to immigration was equally rife with hypocrisy. While he made headlines for his stance against sanctuary cities and his strict anti-immigration policies, his own family story was rooted in immigration. His mother, a working-class immigrant from Italy, had come to America seeking a better life. This was the same man who, just a few short years earlier, would call out immigrant communities as a threat to American identity, leveraging their fears for political gain. The contrast between his personal history and his political rhetoric became a glaring example of the double standards he was willing to uphold. He championed laws to strip rights from undocumented immigrants while building his political brand on the backs of those who had been in his very position not long ago. DeSantis's policies weren't just contradictory, they were increasingly hostile. From banning critical race theory in schools to fighting LGBTQ+ rights, his political moves seemed more focused on stoking fear and anger than solving actual problems. His actions mirrored the classic playbook of populist authoritarianism: speak to the lowest common denominator, divide the electorate, and make your political career about maintaining power at all costs. But the cracks were starting to show. His flirtation with national politics had made it clear he was positioning himself for higher office, and his campaign for the presidency wasn't just about winning, it was about controlling the narrative. Yet, the deeper his attacks grew, the more his personal flaws became apparent. His constant need to lash out, to undermine opponents, wasn't a sign of strength, it was a sign of weakness. He was afraid that if the narrative ever slipped from his hands, he would be left exposed. As the debate with Kamala Harris loomed, DeSantis knew that his hold on the spotlight was fragile. His divisive tactics had earned him a following, but they had also earned him enemies. His attacks on Harris were more than just a political maneuver, they were his attempt to save a crumbling political identity. In that moment, he wasn't just trying to score points, he was fighting to keep his image intact. And that fear, his fear of losing control, would be his undoing. But as he prepared to face Harris on that stage, something was clear: his personal attacks weren't just a political strategy, they were a last-ditch effort to hold on to power. He had built his career on division, and now, as he faced his greatest challenge, it was becoming evident that the very tactics that had brought him to the top were the ones that would eventually tear him down. Kamala Harris was never meant to be a quiet bystander. She wasn't born into privilege or comfort, she was born with purpose, with a deep understanding that the only way to change the world was to actively fight for it. Raised in the heart of Oakland, California, Kamala was the daughter of two immigrants who carried the weight of a generation's dreams on their shoulders. Her mother, Shyamala, a cancer researcher from India, and her father, Donald, a Jamaican economist, instilled in her the values of resilience, intellect, and the unwavering belief that the world could be a better place if people fought for justice. Her childhood wasn't without its struggles. Kamala grew up in a time when racial tensions were high, when being a person of color in America meant constantly proving your worth, even when you already knew it. Her parents faced their own share of discrimination, her mother as an immigrant woman in a male-dominated scientific community, her father as an academic in a society that wasn't always welcoming to black intellectuals. Kamala, however, was never one to shy away from challenge. She watched her parents fight for their place, and in doing so, she learned that success wasn't about avoiding hardship, it was about embracing it, understanding it, and pushing through it. As a young girl, Kamala was fiercely independent. She often reflected on the lessons her mother taught her, lessons that went beyond books or lectures. Kamala learned that real change didn't happen by waiting for it to come to you, it happened when you went out and grabbed it. She carried that ethos with her as she entered Howard University, where she quickly became known for her fierce intellect and her relentless passion for justice. It was there that she first realized the magnitude of the legal system's influence on society, how it shaped people's lives, both for better and for worse. She saw it not as a system of abstract rules, but as a mechanism that could either reinforce oppression or dismantle it. Her career as a prosecutor was no accident. Kamala wasn't interested in politics for the sake of fame or power, she was interested in it because she knew that justice was a living, breathing thing. She became a district attorney in San Francisco, a place that mirrored the racial and socio-economic disparities that she had witnessed growing up. She tackled tough cases, made the difficult calls, and worked tirelessly to reform a criminal justice system that had long been stacked against people of color. She built a reputation for fairness and tenacity, always willing to stand up for the voiceless, and never backing down in the face of injustice. But Kamala's rise was never easy. There were always critics, those who questioned her decisions, who attacked her for not being tough enough or for taking the wrong stance on an issue. But for every critic, there were 1,000 people who saw her not just as a politician, but as a symbol of possibility. Kamala wasn't just a trailblazer because of her race or gender, she was a trailblazer because of her refusal to accept the status quo. She didn't simply rise to the top of a male-dominated profession, she reshaped it, molded it into something more inclusive, more just. Her time as California's Attorney General wasn't marked by scandal or political gamesmanship, it was marked by a clear commitment to creating a more equitable society. She fought for women's rights, for the rights of the LGBTQ+ community, and for people who had long been forgotten by the system. Her work on criminal justice reform, her fight against the death penalty, and her efforts to hold big corporations accountable weren't just policy decisions, they were personal missions. She wasn't in the business of making headlines, she was in the business of making a real difference. And when the opportunity to serve as Vice President of the United States came knocking, Kamala didn't hesitate. Her decision to run with Joe Biden wasn't about following the conventional path, it was about ensuring that the future of America would reflect its diversity, its promise, and its potential. Kamala wasn't just a politician, she was a movement in and of herself, a living testament to the power of persistence and the strength that comes from fighting not just for your own future, but for the future of everyone. In the debate with Ron DeSantis, she wasn't just fighting for a political victory, she was fighting for everything she had worked for, justice, dignity, and equality for all. But she was also fighting for every immigrant who had ever been told they didn't belong. She was fighting for every woman who had been dismissed, for every person of color who had been told their voice didn't matter. She was fighting for those who had no voice, and those who were silenced by the oppressive forces of hatred and division. Kamala had faced adversity at every stage of her life. But in this moment, she was not just prepared, she was primed. Her upbringing had given her the tools to navigate the most treacherous political waters. Her career had given her the experience to speak truth to power. And her resolve was rooted in something deeper than ambition, it was rooted in a commitment to the people who needed her voice, who needed her strength, and who needed her to lead them through this storm. She knew what was at stake. The country was at a crossroads, and this debate wasn't just another political skirmish. It was a chance to show America who she truly was, who they could be, if they chose dignity over divisiveness, truth over lies. The pressure was immense, but Kamala wasn't the kind of person who would shrink from the moment. She had spent her life preparing for this, facing down the forces of bigotry and division, time and time again. And she was ready. Kamala Harris wasn't just prepared to win this debate, she was prepared to remind America that the fight for justice, for equality, and for truth was worth every ounce of her strength. Because she knew that, in the end, it was never about her, it was about the people she had promised to serve. And no matter the cost, she was going to fight for them. The debate had started with the usual back and forth, the carefully prepared arguments, the policy details, the strategic pauses. But the moment Ron DeSantis unleashed his first personal attack, it was clear the gloves were off. Kamala Harris had been discussing her plans for a more inclusive immigration policy when DeSantis, leaning forward on his podium, interrupted. "Your policies aren't just misguided," he sneered, his voice cutting through the air. "They're dangerous. You're welcoming criminals into this country. Your open border agenda is exactly what's tearing this nation apart." The audience tensed. The room, which had once felt like a neutral battleground for ideas, now felt charged with hostility. The sharpness of DeSantis's words hung in the air, like the heavy smell of gunpowder after a shot is fired. Kamala didn't flinch. Her gaze remained steady, her posture unyielding. "With all due respect, Governor, my policies aren't about inviting harm, they're about human dignity," she replied, her voice steady but firm. "America's greatness has always been built on the strength of its diversity. We can both protect our borders and still honor our values of compassion and justice." DeSantis smirked, his eyes narrowing. "Compassion? Is that what you call it? It's easy to preach compassion when you don't have to deal with the real consequences on the ground. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? You've spent your entire career out of touch with what real Americans face. Kamala's eyes flickered for the briefest moment, but she didn't let the jab get to her. She had spent years being underestimated, dismissed, and attacked by people like DeSantis. This moment, this debate, wasn't going to be any different. She was here for something bigger than herself. I understand the consequences of failing to act, Governor, Kamala said, her voice still calm, yet with an underlying strength that resonated. I've seen what happens when we fail to protect families, when we fail to defend the most vulnerable among us. That's why I fight for people, not against them. And I always will. The crowd shifted, murmurs rippling through the room. Some faces hardened, others softened. The air felt thick with the tension between the two of them. DeSantis wasn't finished. He leaned in even closer, his tone dripping with condescension. You talk about protecting families, but let's be real, DeSantis said, his voice rising with false righteousness. Your party's policies are what's really destroying families. Look at the cities your side runs, crime is out of control. Your so-called progressive utopia is a disaster. You can't even keep your own people safe. A sharp intake of breath echoed in the room. DeSantis's words were like daggers, meant to wound, to break Kamala's composure, to get under her skin. He was digging deep, pulling on every thread of fear, division, and doubt that had been festering in the political conversation. But Kamala, ever unshaken, stood her ground. Governor, let me remind you, she said, her voice unwavering, it's easy to point fingers and throw blame, but leadership is about more than grandstanding. It's about taking responsibility for your actions and finding solutions, not making things worse with divisive rhetoric. People are scared, Governor. They need leadership. They need compassion. They need someone who isn't going to use fear to manipulate them. The room was electric now, the tension palpable. DeSantis's face reddened, his fingers gripping the edge of the podium like a lifeline. He was losing control, and everyone could see it. Kamala wasn't rattled by his attacks. She didn't need to raise her voice or fight back with fire and fury. She fought with the calm assurance that truth always had the last word. DeSantis turned to the audience, throwing his arms up in exasperation. Oh, please. Look at this country right now. You think we're better off with your way? You've let these policies spiral out of control, and now you want to pretend everything's fine. What are you going to say next? That your plans will magically fix everything? Kamala's voice, soft but commanding, cut through the noise. What I'm saying, Governor, is that real leadership means listening to people, not feeding them fear. Your approach may get you applause from the far right, but it's not solving the problems that families are facing. It's not solving the crisis in our healthcare system, or addressing the rising inequality in our communities. DeSantis's eyes darkened. His attack was no longer about policy, it was personal, meant to tear Kamala down, to paint her as weak, out of touch, unfit. He saw her calmness as an opening, a crack in her armor. He wasn't just fighting her politics anymore, he was fighting her. The audience was split. Some nodded at Kamala's poise, admiring her unwavering commitment to dignity and empathy. Others, however, looked at her as though she was a symbol of everything they resented. And then, as the insults escalated, something happened that no one saw coming. Kamala held her ground, her gaze never faltering. She wasn't here to win a shouting match. She wasn't here to fuel the fire of anger that DeSantis was trying to provoke. No, Kamala Harris was playing a different game, one of truth, one that transcended the petty theatrics DeSantis was desperately trying to push. But as the final rounds of verbal sparring reached their peak, the room waited, tension mounting. The question hanging in the air, who would blink first? It was clear, this was no longer a battle of politics. It was a battle of wills. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Kamala Harris had endured the personal attacks, the name-calling, the thinly veiled jabs designed to provoke her, to get under her skin. DeSantis had pulled no punches, he had tried to bait her, to push her into a corner where she would lash out. But Kamala hadn't budged. She had stayed calm, composed, her every word rooted in truth, dignity, and the promise of a better America. And now, it was her turn. DeSantis had just made his final thrust, loud, aggressive, and full of arrogance. "You've failed, Kamala," he spat. "You've failed your state, you've failed your party, and now you're failing the American people. You've spent your career pushing dangerous, irresponsible policies, and it's time for someone to take charge, someone who understands what America really needs." The words hit the air like a bomb, the crowd's breath collectively held. For a moment, everything went still. DeSantis was basking in the afterglow of his sharpness, his bravado swelling as if he had struck a decisive blow. He wasn't just attacking her policies anymore, he was attacking her very core. But Kamala didn't flinch. She didn't recoil. She didn't lose her cool. Instead, her gaze locked onto DeSantis, steady and unwavering. Her voice, when it came, was calm, almost chilling in its precision. "You can insult me, Governor," she said softly, each word deliberate, cutting through the air with a weight that made every person in the room pause. "But you can't hide the truth." The words settled like a quiet storm. DeSantis's posture shifted, the energy in the room changing with the subtle power in Kamala's delivery. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't playing his game. She was dismantling him with a laser-focused response, her conviction so strong that even his bravado couldn't shield him from it. "Governor, you've spent your whole career playing to the fear and anger of a few," Kamala continued, her voice unwavering. "You're willing to pit Americans against each other for political gain. You've taken the easy way out, blaming others instead of finding real solutions. You've made a career of division, and now, you want to make America smaller. You want to turn our great country into a fortress that keeps out anyone who doesn't fit your narrow vision. And that's not leadership, that's fear." The crowd stirred. Some shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward in their seats. Kamala's words were landing like punches, but she wasn't done. "Not yet. The truth is, Governor," Kamala pressed, "you can't run from the consequences of your actions. You can try to spin your way out of this. You can shout louder, blame harder, but in the end, the facts remain the same. Your policies have been a failure. They've failed the people you claim to represent. And I'm not going to sit here and let you get away with pretending otherwise." DeSantis's jaw tightened. His confident stance had wavered, his hands now gripping the edges of the podium, his knuckles white. He wasn't used to being confronted like this. He was used to dominating the stage, throwing insults and watching them land. But Kamala's composed, no-nonsense rebuttal was not something he could bully away. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to cut through. The audience was split, some faces betrayed admiration, others discomfort. But Kamala wasn't just speaking to the room, she was speaking to America. Every word she uttered was a declaration of what she stood for, values that resonated far beyond this debate. She took a step closer to the podium, her voice steady but piercing. "You may think that you're untouchable, Governor. That your rhetoric can distract people from the truth. But the American people are smarter than that. They see through your games, your empty promises, your blatant hypocrisy." The word hypocrisy seemed to linger in the air like a heavy weight. Kamala wasn't just attacking his policies now, she was attacking his entire political identity. She was exposing the man behind the podium, revealing the cracks in his armor that no amount of bravado could cover up. "Let's talk about hypocrisy for a moment," she continued, her gaze unwavering. "You stand here pretending to fight for the working class, but you've spent your time in office signing laws that protect the wealthy, that protect corporations, while families across this country suffer. You rail against immigration, yet you forget that your own ancestors were immigrants. You pander to fear, but when it's time to actually deliver real change, you fall silent." DeSantis's posture was faltering now, a slight twitch in his face betraying the tension inside. The mask was slipping. His confident sneer, once so assured, was now nothing more than a faint shadow of his earlier bravado. Kamala was right. She had peeled back the layers of his narrative, exposing the empty shell beneath. "You talk about real America," Kamala said, her voice rising slightly, the clarity of her words cutting through his defenses. "But the real America isn't the one you've been selling. The real America is diverse, it's resilient, it's inclusive. It's the people who wake up every morning, working 2 jobs, raising families, and striving for something better. It's the immigrants who come here seeking safety and opportunity. It's the students who march for their rights. It's the single mothers, the LGBTQ+ community, the black and brown families who have fought for their place in this country. That's the real America." There was a sharp inhale from the audience, a collective shift in the room. Kamala had taken the debate to another level entirely. This wasn't just politics, it was a clash of values, and she had just hit DeSantis where it hurt the most. And then, Kamala delivered her final blow. "Governor, your politics may be popular with some, but they're rooted in fear. They're rooted in exclusion. And they will never build the kind of America we need. The America we need is one built on justice, on compassion, and on equality for all." The room erupted. Some cheered, others sat stunned, the power of Kamala's words reverberating through the space. DeSantis, once so sure of himself, was visibly rattled now. His eyes darted nervously, his breathing more erratic. His smile had vanished, replaced by the tense look of a man who realized that he had underestimated his opponent. Kamala had done it. She hadn't just won the argument. She had dismantled DeSantis's entire narrative. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone in that room, and the millions watching, that truth, dignity, and justice were the only foundations strong enough to build a future worth fighting for. The applause was deafening, but Kamala's focus remained unshaken. She had said her piece, and in doing so, she had proven that, in this battle, the truth would always have the final word. The ball was now in DeSantis's court, and it was clear, he was crumbling. The debate had ended, but the echoes of Kamala Harris's mic drop moment would reverberate far beyond the confines of that stage. Within moments of the last words being spoken, the air shifted. The world was watching, and the world had just witnessed something unprecedented. On social media, the reaction was instant and overwhelming. Kamala Harris at Kamala Harris destroys Ron DeSantis in debate. #Truth wins, the tweet spread like wildfire, quickly amassing hundreds of thousands of likes, retweets, and shares. It wasn't just a victory in the debate, it was a political earthquake. On Twitter, the hashtag Truth wins trended globally within minutes. Posts flooded in from every corner of the political spectrum, from young progressives praising Kamala's dignity, to political analysts dissecting every word she had said. People from all walks of life shared their thoughts, their reactions, and their admiration. Kamala Harris just schooled Ron DeSantis. Calm, composed, and cutting to the heart of the matter. Respect. #Truth wins, a tweet from an influential political analyst went viral, with over 1 million retweets. But it wasn't just words that were exploding online. Memes, GIFs, and short video clips of Kamala's final takedown flooded Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. One clip, showing Kamala saying, "You can insult me, Governor, but you can't hide the truth," was paired with the iconic mic drop sound effect and shared by millions. People from all over the world were reposting it, each viewing reinforcing Kamala as the embodiment of poise and power. Meanwhile, DeSantis was getting roasted. Memes of his increasingly awkward facial expressions during Kamala's counterattack flooded timelines. One viral post juxtaposed his stiff, panicked smile with a "what's the point of having a defense if you can't defend it" meme from a famous film scene. The internet had turned on him in ways he hadn't anticipated. The backlash was swift and unforgiving, with users mocking his inability to regain control, portraying him as the villain of the night, a man who had fallen victim to his own arrogance. TikTokers began filming their own takes on the debate, creating hilarious parodies where DeSantis was made to look even more ridiculous. One particularly popular TikTok showed an exaggerated, animated version of DeSantis fumbling through his notes while Kamala calmly and effortlessly took control of the room. By the time the day had ended, the debate had become a cultural flashpoint. The moment of Kamala's rebuttal was now seared into the minds of millions. She wasn't just a politician anymore, she was a symbol of truth and integrity in a system often bogged down by corruption and lies. The cultural reactions that followed were swift and thunderous. Celebrities and pundits weighed in, offering their thoughts and reflections on the debate. Kamala Harris just became the standard for grace under pressure. Absolutely owning that stage. #Truth wins, said Ava DuVernay in a tweet that garnered over 200,000 likes. The film director, known for her advocacy for justice and human rights, shared the sentiment echoed by many in the entertainment industry. Rihanna, ever outspoken, tweeted, "Kamala Harris is a queen." That debate was next level. Standing up for all of us. #Truth wins. The pop star's words resonated widely, with fans commenting their support, calling Kamala a role model and a warrior for truth. Even late-night hosts jumped into the conversation. Stephen Colbert spent an entire segment breaking down Kamala's performance, praising her for refusing to engage with DeSantis on his level. "She didn't just win the debate, she won the hearts of America," Colbert said, his audience erupting into applause. But it wasn't just celebrities in the entertainment industry who took to social media. Politicians, both from within Kamala's own party and outside of it, spoke up. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez tweeted, "Kamala Harris just showed the nation what true leadership looks like. Truth, fear. #Truth wins," and it quickly became one of the most retweeted political statements of the year. Even Bernie Sanders, the progressive stalwart, took to social media to express his admiration. Kamala Harris's integrity shines through, she's unshakable, and tonight she proved that the future of America is rooted in justice. But perhaps the most telling cultural reaction came from the Republican side. Former governors and strategists, who had once cheered on DeSantis' aggressive tactics, were now questioning his political approach. DeSantis needs a serious rethink on his strategy. "This is not the way to win a nation," tweeted former Republican Governor John Kasich. His tweet sparked a flurry of debate among conservative figures. DeSantis had crossed the line from the firebrand politician many admired to a figure whose aggression was alienating even his own base. The media shifted almost instantly as well. News outlets, from CNN to Fox News, scrambled to analyze the aftermath of the debate. Political talk shows that night couldn't stop talking about it. They analyzed Kamala's performance with reverence, dissecting how her measured responses and poise under pressure had earned her widespread admiration. On Fox News, conservative pundits struggled to defend DeSantis's approach, with many offering tepid responses or outright criticism. "He got too personal," one analyst admitted. Kamala stood her ground, and the nation saw her as the victor. But beyond social media and punditry, there was a tangible shift in public opinion. Kamala's calm, dignified stand against DeSantis's heated attacks didn't just win the debate, it won hearts across America. Polling immediately after the debate showed a surge in support for Kamala, with favorability ratings rising by 12 points among key swing voters. DeSantis's numbers, on the other hand, began to dip. His aggressive tactics, once seen as his strength, now seemed like desperation. His image as a strong, unwavering leader was unraveling, as more and more Americans began to see through the divisive rhetoric. In focus groups, even conservative-leaning voters expressed admiration for Kamala's ability to stay composed in the face of personal attacks. One respondent said, "Kamala was the only one who made sense tonight. She was the only one who seemed like she cared about the people and not just winning." DeSantis' reputation, built on years of cutting through the noise with his hard-edged tactics, now seemed out of place in a country increasingly looking for unity over division. His aggressive approach, which had once gained him support in certain circles, now made him seem like a man out of touch with the national mood. By the end of the week, Kamala's victory had become more than just a political milestone, it had become a cultural moment. People spoke of the debate with reverence. She wasn't just a politician anymore, she was a symbol of what America could be when it chose empathy, truth, and dignity over fear, anger, and division. Kamala had won the debate, and the country was watching. And in that moment, it felt like the tide was turning. In the days following the debate, Kamala Harris sat quietly, reflecting on the fierce exchange she had endured. The media coverage, the social media storm, the accolades, it all seemed distant now. The whirlwind of public opinion was not what mattered to her. What mattered was the message she had conveyed, and the future she hoped to shape. She thought about the harsh attacks from Ron DeSantis, about the moments when his words had tried to wound her, to rattle her composure. But Kamala knew those attacks were not just about her. They were about a deeper fight, the fight for the soul of the nation. They were about whether America would choose truth or deceit, compassion or cruelty, unity or division. And as the debate had unfolded, Kamala realized something powerful: the attack on her wasn't just personal. It was a challenge to everything she stood for, everything she had worked for in her entire career. It was a challenge to the idea of America itself. Looking back on that night, she understood more than ever that this wasn't just a debate about policies. This was a battle for the kind of country Americans wanted to build, for the kind of leadership they wanted to follow. The divisive rhetoric that had been spewed at her, the attacks that had tried to paint her as weak, as out of touch, had never been about truth. They were about a political agenda that sought to manipulate, to divide, and to incite fear. And in the end, Kamala knew that the people of this country weren't going to be swayed by fear. They weren't going to be swayed by division. They were yearning for something different. Kamala wasn't just defending herself, she was defending the future of a nation that had long struggled with its identity, with its promises, and with its potential. Her response in that debate was more than just a counterattack. It was a statement of who she was, who America was, and who America could be. The moment she said, "You can insult me, Governor, but you can't hide the truth," it was a reminder that no matter how loud the lies got, the truth would always find its way through. It would always rise above the noise, and it would always prevail. In those quiet moments of reflection, Kamala thought of the people she had met throughout her career, the families she had fought for as a prosecutor, the communities she had served as a public official, the women and immigrants who had told her their stories. Their struggles, their dreams, their hopes, these were the reasons she fought. These were the people who had shaped her, who had helped her understand that leadership was not about grand speeches or empty promises. Leadership was about service. It was about lifting others up, not tearing them down. It was about embodying dignity in a world that so often sought to strip it away. As she stood before the nation, in that moment of clarity, Kamala knew that this was not a fight she could back down from. This was not a time for compromise, not a time to water down the values that had carried her to this point. The people of America deserved better. They deserved leaders who would speak to the best of their ideals, who would challenge the status quo with courage and integrity. They deserved a politics of hope, not hate. A politics of truth, not lies. The debate with Ron DeSantis had proven something that Kamala already knew in her heart: America was ready for a new kind of leadership. A leadership that didn't depend on insults or fear tactics. A leadership that didn't play to the lowest common denominator. The time had come for a politics that embraced the dignity of every person, that respected the diverse backgrounds and experiences that made this country great. Tonight, Kamala said in a later interview, her voice calm but strong, "We saw the kind of politics we should never settle for." It was a politics of division, of fear, of anger. But it's also a reminder that we don't have to accept that. We don't have to give in to the forces that seek to tear us apart. The American people are better than that. We deserve better than that. Her words rang with clarity, with the kind of truth that couldn't be denied. The debate wasn't just about policy, it was about the future of America's soul. It was about who we wanted to be as a nation, who we wanted to follow, and what kind of country we wanted to leave behind for future generations. Kamala's call for a politics of unity and dignity had struck a chord with millions. Her composure, her commitment to truth, had shown them the path forward. As the public's attention shifted away from the headlines and towards the future, Kamala reaffirmed her resolve. "We will never build this nation by tearing each other down," she said, her voice steady. "We will build it by lifting each other up. We will build it by embracing our differences, by respecting every voice, and by staying true to the values that make us strong." In the days that followed, Kamala's victory was celebrated, not just as a political win, but as a moral victory for the soul of America. The country had watched a woman of integrity and strength stand firm against an assault of divisive rhetoric, and in doing so, she had reminded the people that truth would always rise above the noise. Kamala's final words echoed in the hearts of millions: "America deserves better, and we will be the ones to give it to them. We will stand for truth. We will stand for dignity. And together, we will create the America we know is possible." Her words were not just a call for change, they were a promise. A promise that, no matter the attacks, no matter the obstacles, truth and dignity would always light the way. In the end, Kamala Harris stood tall, proving that truth, dignity, and integrity will always overcome division and hate. Throughout the heated debate, she never wavered. Her calm, measured responses weren't just a political strategy, they were a testament to the values she's fought for her entire life. Where others saw a moment for personal attacks, Kamala saw an opportunity to remind us of something greater, that leadership isn't about tearing people down, it's about building a future based on justice, respect, and truth. What we witnessed that night wasn't just a political debate, it was a defining moment for the future of our nation. Kamala's commitment to dignity and truth set a new standard for how we expect our leaders to act. She didn't just win the debate, she won the hearts of the American people, and her words reminded us that no matter how dark the political landscape gets, light will always find its way through. Now, the real work begins. It's up to each of us to carry this message forward. To stand up for what's right. To fight for a future where truth isn't a casualty of division, where dignity is a right, not a privilege. If you believe in the power of truth, the power of dignity, and the power of a better America, hit that subscribe button. Share this message, and let's make sure the world hears it. Kamala Harris reminded us that we can choose a different path. Now it's our turn to walk it, together. Let's keep pushing for the change we deserve, and never forget that, in the end, truth always wins.